Alors, bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon to all. I would like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting 50 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 26, 2022. The committee is meeting to study the current state of blockchain technology in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23, 2022.
Numerous witnesses who join us today. Thanks for taking the time on this Thursday evening to discuss with us. And we have with us today Brad Mills as an individual, from Daper Labs, Alison Cutler. From the Digital Governance Institute, we have Charlène Bouchard, Guillaume Desiel, and Jean-François Gauthier. From Hut 8 Mining Corporation, we have Jamie Leverton. From Information Communications Technology Council, we have Namir Anani. From Futurity Partners, we have Tanya Woods with us in person in Ottawa. And from MasterCard, we have Jesse McWaters. So thank you all for joining us. It's much appreciated. And given that we have many witnesses and a lot of questions, we'll start without further ado with Mr. Mills for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for inviting me to speak here. My name is Brad Mills, and I'm one of the founding members of the Bitcoin Coalition of Canada, which is an upstart multi-partisan group working to educate policymakers, journalists, and everyday Canadians about the importance of Bitcoin. I'm also an active angel investor and advisor in 28 Bitcoin startups, some of which are based here in Canada. And these companies are working to help balance the scales of socioeconomic justice for billions of people around the world who've been excluded from the traditional financial system. The Bitcoin companies I work with are positively impacting the environment, local economies, and grid infrastructure. My activities primarily focus around financial literacy and financial inclusion for underbanked people living below the poverty line in countries across Africa and Latin America, but also for the millions of underbanked Canadians as well. Combating poverty through Bitcoin education is personal to me. I grew up in an economic depression in Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia during the 90s, where we had one of the highest unemployment rates in Canada. My parents divorced when I was young, and when we were not on EI or welfare, we were living paycheck to paycheck. I lived in 19 different homes growing up, including government housing, and I know all too well the stress of having an empty bank account and seeing an overdraft charge put you into the negative. I'll never forget what it felt like when my dad lost our home to the bank as the interest rates rose. I was part of the underserved and underbanked in Canada. That said, I was lucky enough to be born in a country like Canada with a social safety net, and my quality of life wasn't that bad. Money just was a thing we didn't have. I escaped poverty through entrepreneurship. I bootstrapped a social gaming company that grew to 1 million players in 2009. For the first time in my life, I had some extra money in the bank. So I still lacked financial literacy, and it was during the global financial crisis where most investments seemed unsafe. So I started to learn about investing and the history of money. I began buying gold because of its store value properties. And soon after, I discovered Bitcoin. I understood that it was a decentralized digital gold with no centralized issuer or a company behind it, and with an absolute limited supply where only 21 million coins will ever exist. I started saving in Bitcoin for the same reasons I had bought gold, but I learned soon after that Bitcoin was much more than that. Bitcoin is a once-in-a-species invention. It's the first time we've been able to create digital scarcity. Bitcoin is a fair and equitable base layer of money. It's open source and auditable by anyone who wants to run the software. It doesn't matter if you're a kid in Nigeria, a fisherman in Cape Breton, or a billionaire from New York. Everyone is on the same footing in the Bitcoin network. Most Bitcoiners describe Bitcoin as a savings technology. It makes saving and transferring money available and accessible to anyone, anywhere. And 11 years after I first discovered Bitcoin, it's good to see that Canadians are among the fastest to adopt it. The Bank of Canada recently released a report that found 13% of Canadians own Bitcoin in 2021. And it's worth noting that more Canadian women own Bitcoin today than Canadian men did in 2017. So this is where it's also important to recognize the difference between Bitcoin and everything else going on in the crypto space. As someone who worked on the financial committee of a large crypto fund, I have a uniquely qualified perspective on stablecoins, DeFi, and the broader crypto space. As an analyst doing due diligence on hundreds of blockchain projects in Web3, DeFi, and NFTs, I had a front row seat to the making of the bubble. And unlike Bitcoin, these things are mostly just unregulated securities, often unethically launched and fraudulently pumped on unregulated crypto exchanges, leaving retail buyers holding the bag when the bubble collapses. And these tokens typically have no real product market fit and barely anyone using them outside of the speculators. And last year, I started sounding the alarm, warning, of the coming collapse of platforms like Celsius and Terra Luna and the UST stablecoin, as well as the FTX exchange, at least 6 to 12 months before they blew up. And I'm proud to have directly helped save people from losing tens of millions of dollars in these Web3 crypto and DeFi schemes that exploded. So millions of Canadians have exposure to Bitcoin. It should not be a partisan issue. And this is why I'm very heartened to see members of parliament coming together from across the aisle to have these elevated conversations about cryptocurrency, blockchain, CBDCs, and stablecoins. I can help provide a rational framework of thinking about how Bitcoin should be treated differently from crypto and how we should embrace Bitcoin to increase the financial literacy of Canadians and promote financial inclusion through Bitcoin education. So thank you again for having me and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mills. We'll now move to Alison Cutler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Alison Cutler, and I'm Head of Government Affairs at Dapper Labs. I'm pleased to join you today on behalf of our company and want to open with our eagerness to work alongside government as a trusted resource as you explore a regulatory path forward for our vast and diverse industry. By way of introduction, Dapper Labs is an exciting Canadian success story headquartered in Vancouver. We are the creator of the NFT and continue to be a world leader. When we talk about NFTs, many people think of a picture of a funny ape that someone purchased with a Bitcoin, but our industry is very diverse and there are many different kinds of NFTs. Some enable access to communities, events, or games. Some provide royalties or other rewards. They validate credentials or asset ownership and are simply appreciated as art, collectibles, or mementos. NFTs possess three distinct characteristics that distinguish them from cryptocurrencies and other fungible tokens on the blockchain. NFTs are unique in nature, non-interchangeable, and non-divisible. At Dapper, we make digital collectible NFTs, which you can think of as digital trading cards, which also facilitate highly interactive experiences and are revolutionizing fandom. Our digital collectibles provide real utility. They strengthen relationships between fans and their favorite players and teams and entertainers, provide new creative channels for brand expression, provide engaged and exciting communities, and opportunities for consumers to be rewarded for their fandom, online and offline. As policymakers around the world consider the role of NFTs in society, Dapper Labs serves as a great example of how digital collectibles can be a source of innovation that helps make blockchain technology accessible to everyone. In 2020, we launched NBA Top Shot, taking digital collectible NFTs mainstream and becoming the first blockchain product to surpass 1 million community members. We have developed the world's leading blockchain studio and continued building consumer-facing experiences that allow people to interact with Web3 technology in a way that is easily accessible, secure, transparent, and fun. As the pioneers here, we also recognize and embrace the responsibility to set the bar high with best practices for how this new industry can both promote innovation while ensuring consumers are protected. We have instituted a comprehensive set of industry best practices, including Know Your Customer Protocol, enhanced due diligence, sanction screening, and a transaction monitoring program. We also fully disclose the terms of each individual digital collectible NFT product prior to a purchase so that consumers understand what they own. All of Dapper Labs' digital collectible NFTs are built on the Flow blockchain, which is environmentally sustainable. Minting an NFT on Flow uses less energy than a Google search or an Instagram post. But it's important to remember that Web3 is complex and it can't be regulated through a one-size-fits-all approach or simply by copying existing financial services laws. We would like to ensure that NFT creators, big and small, can continue to innovate and develop ways for society to benefit from this exciting new technology. This is not to say NFTs should not be regulated, just that they shouldn't be governed by what would be overly burdensome rules taken from other sectors. Rather, we would welcome a regulatory regime that will recognize the unique characteristics of NFTs and how they are used in the digital economy. First and foremost, we need to establish clear definitions of what an NFT is and directions for how NFT service providers should be treated. And we think seriously about fraud protection and implementing AML rules and KYC protocols that are proportionate to the risk. We also believe in standards for intellectual property protection and in partnership with provincial regulators and agencies, enhance consumer protection standards. Most importantly, we support an open and engaged dialogue between industry and government. We hope Dapper Labs can be an example for Canadian policymakers of the type of innovation that should be encouraged to make blockchain technology accessible to more communities while doing so safely and responsibly. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Madame Cutler. We'll move now to the Digital Governance Institute, Madame Bouchard. Pardon? Or Monsieur Gauthier.
C'est plutôt Monsieur. Bonjour, c'est plutôt Monsieur Gauthier qui va faire la présentation.
Mr. Gauthier will be presenting. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to be with you today. My name is Jean-François Gauthier, and I'm the CEO of the Institute for Digital Governance. The Institute for Digital Governance is a nonprofit organization that was founded about 10 years ago. Our mission is to design and implement open governance and collaborative management solutions in institutions or organizations for the common good. The passionate team at IGN wants to democratize the principles of a collaborative management using digital technology and the power of collective intelligence as convening tools. Our value proposition as a nonprofit organization is to act to accelerate the digital shift of organizations by implementing open and collaborative governance for their growth. To begin with, I would like to introduce the people who are accompanying me. First of all, Ms. Charlene Bouchard, who holds the research chair on intelligent contracts at Laval University, and I hope she'll be able to answer your questions later. I'm also accompanied by Guillaume Desiel, an administrator at IGN. Guillaume is above all an entrepreneur who is very involved in the field of digital culture and blockchain, particularly in its potential for the recognition of rights holders. In November 2019, IGN took the initiative to write a white paper on distributed registries and blockchain. The work was conducted by a steering committee made up of academics, entrepreneurs, lawyers, and public administrators. The chief scientists of Quebec, Hydro-Quebec, the Ministry of Economy and Innovation, the Ministry of Finance of Quebec, Finance Montreal, and the Hub Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean made the preparation of this white paper possible through their respective financial contributions, and I would like to thank them for this. Charlene and Guillaume are two experts who can tell you about concrete applications of blockchain. They are both major contributors to the production of our white paper. And I'm proud to say that our efforts with this white paper have not been in vain. The establishment of the first chair in Quebec on smart contracts at Laval University is an indirect result of our efforts. On the other hand, the innovative projects Guillaume is working on, which are funded by the Canada Council for the Arts, are also a very interesting spin-off. As I mentioned, IGN strongly believes in collective intelligence and citizen empowerment. For us, distributed registries are a historic opportunity to give citizens the ability to manage their own digital identity. In conclusion, and I quote from a preamble of our book, historically, humans have stored information in secure locations. Obviously, the form of these warehouses has changed. From the guarded building to the giant hypersecure server, this approach has remained the same. They are essentially variations on the theme of safe. The blockchain, however, is turning an old practice on its head. At a time when data theft crimes are a new scourge around the world, with the arrival of 5G connectivity, increasing the amount of data in circulation tenfold, at a time when the artificial intelligence revolution is taking hold, distributed ledger technology is emerging as an essential element. It is becoming a new symbol of this digital era that makes data a resource and the security of personal information a condition for success. This issue is eminently strategic. Quebec is now a leader in artificial intelligence research. This promising field is based on mastery of the related field of massive data. So by also mastering the technology of its distributed registers, including blockchain, Quebec would bring together three pillars of this new digital era and strengthen its position as a technology hub. Thank you very much. My colleagues will be very happy to answer any questions you may have with respect to the concrete applications of all of this. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Gauthier, Mr. Bouchard, and Mr. Delisle. Madame Bouchard, rather. I'll turn it over to Hut 8 Mining, Jamie Leverton.
Chair and members of the Industry Committee for having me here today. My name is Jamie Leverton, and I am the CEO of Hut 8. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge on behalf of Hut 8 that our corporate office is located on the unceded territories of the Anishinaabe, Wendake, Haudenosaunee, Mississaugas, and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This land, as well as other territories across Turtle Island that Hut 8 operates in, continue to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. Hut 8 is one of North America's largest innovation-focused digital asset mining pioneers and high-performance computing infrastructure providers, and is the only dual-listed digital asset miner with 100% Canadian operations. We have the highest unencumbered self-mined inventory of Bitcoin of any digital asset miner or publicly traded company globally, and we're also the first Canadian digital asset mining company to list on the NASDAQ. Hut 8 was named after the building at Bletchley Park in the United Kingdom, where Alan Turing created the bomb, a machine that could quickly crack the Enigma code and intercept enemy communications during World War II. Turing's world-changing work in Hut 8 saved countless lives and transformed cryptography as we know it. His advances in code breaking laid the foundation for blockchain technology as it stands today. I'd like to start by emphasizing the strength of talent we have in this innovative industry based right here in Canada. Hut 8 is a Canadian success story, and we're proud of our roots. Each member of our executive team comes to Hut 8 from other established industries. In fact, our seasoned executive, 40% of whom are female, has a collective century of experience leading businesses in other established Canadian industries. Hut 8 is the exemplification of the innovation economy. As seasoned leaders, we're applying our knowledge and expertise to help drive the growth of Bitcoin adoption and blockchain in Canada and around the globe. We are very much in the nascent stage of understanding the potential of blockchain adoption and the positive effects it promises to have on Canada's economic sectors. But with a laser focus on regulating with the end goal of driving innovation, the Canadian government has a generational opportunity to take a leadership role in driving both Canadian and global adoption of blockchain technology. And these hearings are a great first step forward toward achieving that unique position. We are proud to be taking part in your study and believe that collaborating with industry to achieve our mutual goals is very encouraging. In addition to abundant talent, Canada also has abundant natural resources to support Bitcoin mining, which in turn stabilizes the blockchain. Many miners in Canada harness the country's hydro and nuclear energy sources to power their operations. On our end, we use Canada's natural cooling system, our cold winters, to minimize heat and mine much more efficiently than many of our global peers. It's not well understood that Bitcoin mining can also help stabilize energy grids, which is something other large industrial scale workloads simply cannot do. At our Medicine Hat facility, for example, we work with the city to manage energy consumption in real time. If the city needs us to power down to meet residential and industrial demand because of a storm or peak usage, we can do so in less than 2 minutes and power back up just as fast, ensuring the most efficient and consistent use of the available energy. We are also proud to be one of the largest taxpayers in the city of Medicine Hat. While innovation can go a long way to improving environmental goals, so too can bold corporate leadership. Hut 8 is committed to achieve carbon neutrality by the end of 2025, and we're proud of this ambitious target that is a shared priority with our government. As you've heard over the past few meetings, blockchain has a wide range of potential applications that can change how we do things across many industries. Advancements in blockchain technology will happen with or without Canada. While we were disappointed in the defeat of C249, I'd like to thank the committee for conducting this study and taking recommendations for how to best regulate the space with the goal of growing the sector while protecting consumers. We hope the future of digital asset regulation in the country works within our current financial system to improve financial inclusion. We're all working with regulatory bodies and authorities, but as a country, we need a concrete framework to protect consumers, attract investment, innovate, and grow the economy. Bitcoin and the blockchain represent a new level of both the internet and the global financial system, one that empowers individual freedom that traditional banking services cannot provide. Like in any industry, bad actors exist, and fraud cases like we are currently seeing with FTX emphasize the need for cooperation between government and business. We've heard a lot about risk and consumer protection in this study. I think it's important to note that while digital assets like Bitcoin have lost significant value in the past 9 months, this is not entirely abnormal. Many securities fluctuate in the same way, yet we don't use that rationale to stifle venture capital investment. The UN has estimated that up to 5% of global GDP, equivalent to $4 trillion US dollars, is used for money laundering and illicit activity, which is 400 times more than the criminal activity across all cryptocurrencies. At Hut 8, we understand very well the cyclical nature of Bitcoin, which is why we have an investment strategy to hold our digital assets. Our business is a long-term play operating on the belief that digital assets like Bitcoin and technologies like blockchain have tremendous growth potential and applicability as the innovation economy takes shape. Simply put, the right regulation with a laser focus on driving innovation, Bitcoin and blockchain technology stand to benefit most major industries around the globe. Digital assets should be regulated and treated as personal property. By focusing on the end user, we are able to ensure that we keep the rights and needs of Canadians in mind, which is crucial. We look forward to submitting our recommendations to this committee on what a future regulatory framework might look like. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Leverton. We'll now turn to Namir Anani from the Information Communications Technology Council.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. Je vous remercie tout d'abord de...
First of all, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to give a presentation to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology as part of its study on blockchain technology.
I'm the President and CEO of the Information and Communications Technology Council, ICTC. As a neutral center of expertise with over 100 employees across Canada and a mandate of advancing Canada's digital advantage in a global context, ICTC strives to provide forward-looking research, evidence-based policy advice, and innovative capacity-building solutions to assist Canadians, policymakers, as well as businesses leverage the full potential of the digital opportunities in today and tomorrow's economy. For a bit of a background, my presentation today briefly expands on the merits of blockchain technology, its derived markets, and its potential to heighten Canada's economy and job market while unleashing new economic activities as part of the evolving Web3 and the Internet of Value. For a bit of a context, it is fair to say that the construct of the global economy is based on a set of contracts, transactions, and records to govern our economic, legal, and political system. They protect assets, establish and verify identity, and document sequence of events. They also govern interactions among nations, businesses, communities, and individuals. Blockchain has in recent years emerged as the foundational technology, offering solutions to improve business value chains, enhance efficiencies, enable a system of trust based on consensus, while unlocking at the same time further economic activities without the need of a trusted third-party intermediary. Applications of this technology, as you may have heard so far, have enabled solutions in trade and supply chain management, financial services, healthcare, manufacturing, identity management, smart cities, art and media, property and title transfers, and many others. The ecosystem of blockchain now extends to smart contracts, digital assets, tokens, NFTs, DeFi, stable coins, and cryptocurrencies. That much of that will be discussed today. Some relevant facts on the Canadian economy and globally as it pertains to blockchain and Web3. In 2020, building on ICTC's earlier survey of Canada's blockchain ecosystem, ICTC published a report titled Chain Reaction, Investment in Canada's Blockchain Ecosystem. The report highlighted the growth potential of blockchain technology and outlined critical factors for the Canadian economy. An overarching theme of this report is that Canada punches above its weight in global blockchain innovations and entrepreneurial capacity with a workforce of around 16,000 professionals, much higher now since the report was done almost 3 years ago, supported by world-class academic research institutions. And examples of that Canadian leadership, obviously, we've all heard of those, including the intellectual property and the genesis of the development of Ethereum. In terms of global blockchain technology market, it is forecasted, according to a recent precedence research, to grow at a rate of 87.1% CAGR. That's compound annual growth rate from 2022 to 2030, and is expected to surpass 1.59 trillion US dollars by 2030. The token economy alone, of a market size that is built on the blockchain and is part of the Web3, is estimated to be around 17 trillion US dollars by 2030, according to a recent Boston Consulting Group research. Market forecast also by Cisco estimated that by 2027, as much as 10% of the global GDP could be stored on blockchains. Additionally, a recent LinkedIn report on global blockchain talent insights with focus on Web3 highlighted that Canada has one of the highest demand for talent in this space among countries like Spain, France, Singapore, and the US. On the regulatory side, while important strides have been developed by FinTrack and IROC to govern crypto transactions, the broader regulatory uncertainty pertaining to the evolution of Web3 in Canada remains a significant barrier that can potentially curtail investment and innovation in this space. The European Union, as you've heard so far, has recently introduced the MiCA, Markets in Crypto Assets, regulations that address crypto assets that are not currently governed by existing regulations, such as e-money tokens, stable coins, NFTs, utility tokens, or asset reference tokens, they call them ART, all part of the Web3. In summary, the blockchain worldwide market is growing rapidly and is very competitive, with many countries fast-tracking the development of blockchain platforms, as well as talent and investment attraction. Topping the list are Estonia, Switzerland, United Arab Emirates, Sweden, Singapore, and the United States, as much as many other organizations. In conclusion, for Canada to be a leader in this environment, an all-encompassing strategy is needed to address the following. First, supporting research in this space with focus on commercialization through targeted investments. Two, favoring foreign direct investment attraction that promote blockchain and Web3 advancement while growing the ecosystem of entrepreneurs and jobs in Canada. Third, carefully establishing a regulatory regime that enables certainty, transparency, and supports innovations while sending a signal to global markets that Canada is a prime place for blockchain and Web3 development. And lastly, preparing Canada's talent for Web3 and tomorrow's Internet of Value economy will be critical to maintain Canada's innovation capacity in this space. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anani. We'll now turn to Tanya Woods from Futurity Partners.
Good afternoon, honorable committee members. Thank you for committing to listen, to learn, and consider how blockchain and digital asset technology is being used today and can be used in the future to best support Canadians and their capacity to confidently engage in the digital economy. My name is Tanya Woods. I'm the CEO of Futurity Partners, a strategic advisory firm working globally with future-forward public and private organizations innovating with blockchain, AI, quantum, and Web3 technologies to achieve positive public impact objectives. I join you today as a legally trained subject matter expert with nearly 20 years of experience working on decentralized and digital technologies and the related global, legal, and policy issues. Some of my relevant contributions include writing the first academic paper on smart contracts for music rights for Web 3.0 in 2008 and catalyzing the payout of $50 million of unpaid royalties in Canada to musicians. I've innovated world-leading copyright enforcement provisions targeting bad actors in peer-to-peer ecosystems and participated as a member of Canada's trade negotiating team advancing global and digital enforcement agendas. I founded Canada's first blockchain and digital asset trade association, the Chamber of Digital Commerce Canada, where we created the first ever blockchain policy strategy for Canada and designed the first ever economic study measuring the economic contributions of the industry. And I've designed and built the the first decentralized in-kind donation platform that enables in-kind donations to flow easily, quickly, and accountably to charities and not-for-profits in real time. I'm here today to support your work because Canada's blockchain innovation ecosystem has the capacity to punch well above its weight globally if provided with the right conditions for success. While not a panacea, today we are discussing an incredibly transformative technology vertical that has the power to correct and improve outdated systems, processes, and people's lives. I would like to share 2 short use cases that demonstrate the public importance of this technology we are discussing today. The first relates to cybercrime and human exploitation. Today, more than 40 million people are estimated to live in modern slavery, being trafficked and exploited, including here in Canada. Most cross-border trafficking happens using falsified identity documents. Blockchain innovators are working today to advance digital identity technology so every person has incorruptible identification credentials. The benefits of digital identity go beyond human exploitation and include enhancements to fight against money laundering, terrorist financing, and other areas of organized crime. In 2019, it was a blockchain cybersecurity startup that enabled the U.S. Department of Justice and global law enforcement officials to take down the world's largest child pornography ring. The ring and its cast of characters was as global and decentralized as the Bitcoin they used to purchase access to clips of child sexual abuse. What foiled the ring was the fact that the Bitcoin transfers were traceable on public Bitcoin blockchain ledgers. The immutable, verifiable nature of blockchain-based transactions continues to enable law enforcement officials to work together to uncover dark web and decentralized crime rings that exploit vulnerable people. The jurisdiction of digital assets and custody solutions are key to swift and effective enforcement measures. While incredible progress is being made, a general lack of broad blockchain and digital asset policy consideration, combined with outdated legislation and insufficient funding resources, continues to impede law enforcement's capacity here in Canada. My second use case is about climate innovation. Today it remains unclear when a digital asset token would be considered a security or a mere digital token to enable some other form of useful purpose to its owner, a utility token. Public companies in Canada and globally have been told they must prepare for mandatory ESG disclosures imminently. One way these companies are taking positive steps on climate change is by purchasing carbon credits. The carbon credit market is complex and challenged by a lack of transparency, traceability, and authenticity issues regarding the credits sold and the projects they relate to. One group of Canadians has positioned itself to become the global leading carbon utility token issuer and trading platform, leveraging digital asset technology to represent verified carbon credits and providing a blockchain accounting ledger to track credit purchase and retirement. Because Canada has not provided clarity regarding utility tokens, the team has had to establish a company outside of Canada and seek regulatory approval in another jurisdiction to ensure they could move this much-needed innovation forward in step with public company demand and need. In a world of greenwashing and ever-urgent climate and social impact priorities, Canada should be an obvious jurisdiction for social and environmental innovation that promotes transparency, accountability, and impact. And it is not. I encourage the government to continue this dialogue and to establish a working group of experts to advise on beneficial public blockchain innovation. A lack of knowledge or familiarity with the subject matter must not be used to justify delaying the adoption of positive public and socially beneficial innovation. This is not a moment to politicize this technology. Now is the time for government to move swiftly and holistically to ensure blockchain and digital asset innovation evolves and serves the best interests of all Canadians. Thank you for your time. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And for our last testimony, we have Jesse McWaters from MasterCard. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm honored to have the opportunity to represent MasterCard in today's important discussion on blockchain technology. MasterCard's operations today are about much more than just our card network. Our business is focused on enabling trusted digital commerce across multiple payment rails, including cards, real-time payments, and now blockchain-based networks. When we think about blockchain, we consider it within two distinct dimensions. Firstly, as a novel technology with the potential to transform how information is shared and how value gets moved. And secondly, as the underlying engine for a rapidly growing community of crypto asset ecosystems. As a technology company, MasterCard invests heavily in blockchain research. We have one of the largest blockchain patent portfolios in the payments industry, and we are exploring a range of applications, many of which are unconnected to existing crypto asset ecosystems. This includes building new next-generation digital ID systems, streamlining trade finance, and enabling proof of provenance within complex supply chains. At the same time, MasterCard plays an important role as a payments company. For those consumers who choose to interact with crypto assets, we help them safely bridge the gap between the world of crypto and traditional finance. We do this by establishing secure and compliant on-ramps and off-ramps for funds, and by enabling the issuance of cards that let individuals seamlessly fund transactions using value stored in their crypto accounts. Our due diligence processes have long recognized the risks inherent in novel ecosystems. We apply strict criteria to our partnership with crypto asset service providers, requiring compliance with all relevant regulations and a commitment to robust standards of consumer protection. We fundamentally believe that a blockchain-powered future isn't possible without accountable systems that ensure safety, compliance, and good governance. Recent developments in crypto have underlined the importance of these principles, as well as the detrimental effects of unclear regulation and lax enforcement. In contrast to those who suggest regulations would stymie crypto's rapid pace of innovation, we believe that effective regulation will accelerate the most beneficial kinds of innovation while mitigating many of the evident risks. As this committee considers the regulatory frameworks required for blockchain-based systems, we humbly present the following three suggestions. First, that regulation of crypto assets should begin with a goal of being technology neutral. This means establishing frameworks that avoid regulatory arbitrage by establishing a consistent burden of compliance across similar types of regulated assets and activities. An excellent example of this is the Financial Action Task Force, a global anti-money laundering standards setter, who has provided clear guidance on how existing financial crime rules should be applied to firms handling crypto assets. Secondly, where new regulation is required to accommodate the distinct characteristics of blockchain-based ecosystems, for example, to recognize the unique cybersecurity risks and challenges faced by crypto asset custodians, those new rules should aim to deliver the same regulatory outcomes as comparable assets and activities for a given level of risk. Finally, a particular focus should be given to stablecoins. Efforts to bring stablecoins into the regulatory perimeter are underway in many advanced economies, including the European Union, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Canada may wish to consider the merits of a comprehensive regulatory regime for stablecoins that imposes robust requirements for liquidity and capital management, as well as standards for redeemability, consumer protection, operational resilience, and the resolution of stablecoin arrangements in the event of failure. In closing, we believe blockchain has the potential to drive significant value across a wide range of use cases, but that any system trusted to move value needs clear rules to manage risk and address unforeseen governance challenges. We are eager to collaborate with this committee and with similar efforts across the country to ensure safety, security, and compliance across the financial system. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Merci beaucoup à tous.
Thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony. This is very interesting. And without further ado, we'll begin our discussion with Michelle.
Ms. Woods, is it fair to characterize Web3 technologies as much broader and far-reaching than just cryptocurrencies?
Absolutely.
Would you characterize jobs that are created by Web3 enabled technologies as digital asset based jobs or digital economy jobs?
They're absolutely digital economy jobs.
Are those the types of jobs that you envision when you hear politicians talk about the transition from a natural resource based economy to a digital economy?
Definitely, in part, yeah.
In your report that the Digital Chamber of Commerce issued in 2019, you stated that 37% of all Canadian blockchain activities take place in Western Canada. Is that correct?
There was a sizable and still is a sizable amount of activity in Western Canada.
If there isn't an adequate non-balkanized regulatory framework produced by Canada and its various subnational governments, do we risk pushing some of those jobs out of Western Canada to other jurisdictions?
No question.
Do you think that that's problematic in trying to achieve a diverse economy in Western Canada?
Absolutely.
Do you think that, would you recommend that the government use its convening powers to work across different jurisdictions within Canada to come up with a regulatory framework for the Web3 operating environment?
To the extent regulation is required, yes, and there should be collaboration.
Should that effort have industry in the driver's seat in terms of outlining that balance between the need for regulation, but also to the point where it doesn't actually stifle innovation and make us non-competitive?
The rapid rate of change that industry is leading can really only be best understood by industry. So, yes, engagement's really important.
Would you echo Mr. McWater's comments with regard to the need to utilize the standards for existing types of asset classes in terms of crypto assets as much as possible?
To a certain extent. The caveat is this: they're not exactly the same.
Quite.
The reality is a lot of them are different, but also simply because one type of approach worked years and years ago doesn't mean it still works. And I do feel this is a moment in time where reflection is required.
Would you recommend that the government work with provincial governments and industry to develop a framework that could harmonize the tax and accounting treatment of digital assets across the country?
Yes.
Would you recommend that the government use its convening power to work with provincial governments to standardize procedures for the verification of identity of customers who conduct digital asset transactions?
Yes, and I'll add on that I believe harmonization will be required globally.
Do you believe that if the government does not act on that, we will become uncompetitive in terms of being able to promulgate regulations with other jurisdictions in that regard?
Yes.
Do you believe that would you recommend that the federal government use its convening powers to work with provincial governments to harmonize the terminology and definitions used across Canada to describe different categories of digital assets?
Without question. In 2019, we did a light survey of 7 pieces of legislation, and none of them describe digital assets in the same way.
Would you recommend that the government work with the province and innovators in the area to develop a regulatory framework to mitigate the risks of fraud and market abuse, particularly through education for those who sit on governance bodies as it relates to the oversight of crypto assets, like we saw with FTX, but also within political milieu and in the general public?
Yes.
Do you think that there's adequate educational resources that the government is providing at this point?
Certainly not.
Would you recommend that the government put together a framework using its convening power with provincial governments to increase guidance on how digital assets, including fungible and non-functional tokens, are to be issued?
Yes.
Is there adequate guidance in Canada in that regard right now?
No.
How far behind are we with regard to other countries? How much of a lack of this type of guidance, how much is that costing the economy right now?
Good question. I'm going to tip to anybody in the panel that can answer with hard numbers. I'd rather answer with hard numbers. However, the broad answer is quite a bit. We're very behind. We've lost confidence of our innovation community because we don't see where we're having support. And I think that's a broad statement, but quite likely true across the board.
I would encourage all of the panelists to provide information on those hard numbers. In closing, I had really hoped that the conversation around this issue would be deeply nonpartisan, given the importance of this sector potentially to the growth of the Canadian economy. Would you characterize it as productive from any political actor to politicize the entire industry of Web3 as a platform, as opposed to trying to achieve a regulatory framework that both achieves protections for consumers but also sets Canada up for growth?
No, it's not productive. I think there's too much politicization that's happened, but it's time to get back to work.
And in closing, would you recommend that this committee express to the government the importance of the Web3 ecosystem in terms of the long-term growth of Canada, the Canadian economy?
It's fundamental, and this government has been very supportive of the video game industry. I sit on the board of a publicly traded metaverse stage and production facility, the only one in Canada. It's groundbreaking, and it's leading, and it's founded by video game industry veterans. And they've struggled to get funding, and I've never seen this kind of struggle happen before in the games industry. But technology and content digitization evolves, as does digitization of every industry sector. It's time to look at it together holistically, and these are not partisan issues.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Woods. Madam Rempel. We'll now turn to MP Gahir for 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing before the committee. So my first question is a general one. I think everyone would agree. Would you agree that a lack of regulation creates a risky environment? So, Ms. Woods, there are fears that a lack of regulatory oversight will lead to scams and market manipulation. And among the high-profile cases is OnceCoin, which is revealed as a Ponzi scheme, and people felt like they were getting in because they didn't want to miss out on the next Bitcoin. So would you agree that a lack of regulation creates a risky environment?
Without a doubt.
Yeah. So how does a government go about regulating it? Because decentralization of authority means that it's no one's power to enforce law and order in the network, no moderators, leaders, or a regulatory body. And moreover, since the users are in different countries, it means that you're crossing jurisdictional ground. So how do you go about regulating?
One must start in this way, informing oneself. The other way one must continue is engaging the industry. And I'm certain all of the participants online would have a view for their own individual niche and aspect of this. But it starts with education. The challenge is you can't sit and wait until you feel educated. You need to start engaging in dialogue with industry because this innovation moves incredibly quickly.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Mick Waters. You mentioned asset-specific regulations. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
I think that the core of what I was trying to communicate is that we have established regulation that governs particular types of activities, and it's in the interests of the Canadian people to ensure wherever possible that we achieve consistency across that. And so an example is that I would say that within the context of making payments, for example, on a peer-to-peer or on a person-to-merchant basis, that we should strive to have anti-money laundering, sanction screening, and KYC requirements apply consistently across those, whether one's using a peer-to-peer app, a Bitcoin, a credit card, or some other form of payment technology. Because otherwise we see regulatory arbitrage, and we see activity flowing towards less regulated and less effectively supervised aspects of the payment system.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else, because we have a lot of witnesses today, does anyone else want to speak on the regulation and the fact that it's so decentralized? Yeah. Mr. Mills?
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I take a little bit of, a step back from a lot of the conversation around Web3, comparing that to Bitcoin. Web3 typically is a marketing term. It's like an all-encompassing term that covers things like NFTs, security tokens, DAOs. A lot of this stuff it's existing regulations can address a lot of these use cases where something like Bitcoin actually is decentralized. There is no central party. There's no company that controls Bitcoin. Nobody can have any kind of enforcement of changing the monetary policy of Bitcoin, issuing more coins. You're not reliant upon the efforts of others. I mean, we have clear definitions around what makes something a security. And a lot of the times in these Web3 projects, it is run by companies. And, there is, I agree that we should have regulatory clarity, But I feel like we do kind of have regulatory clarity. It would just be better that, we do come together and make it clear what's a proper path forward. There's nothing wrong with digital securities. There's nothing wrong with your coin, like Flow coin or something, being registered with the Canadian securities operators agencies to be a digital security and compliantly trade. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just currently there's a lot of undisclosed risk in these things for investors, like large grants of coins for anonymous founders or team members or venture capitalists that can take this extra bag of coins that they got in the early launch of this project, maybe even issue more. So I think I would love to also be part of the conversation. Bitcoiners would love to be part of the conversations because you really can't lump Bitcoin in with the rest of everything else that's going on.
Mr. Anani?
Yeah, thank you. So I think if you look at the example of the MICA market and the regulations in Europe in terms of markets in crypto assets, they looked at utility tokens. They actually left the Bitcoins and Ethereum out of this. They looked at utility tokens, they looked at stable coins, they looked at NFTs, specifically if they're fractionalized, because then it becomes a security. But what is important here is that they looked at not only how to create consumer confidence, but create more of stability in the marketplace and attract investment in that. Europe is a large market for crypto assets. They represent 25% of the world economy in terms of crypto asset trading. I think if we're going to develop a regulatory system to manage that from a consumer point of view, from capping the certain trading as MICA has done on certain transactions up to 200 million per day, which is a small amount, I think we've got to go beyond and send a signal that we are in an innovation environment where experimentation is going to be important, that we're going to allow for regulatory sandboxes. It's true that we have to work with the industry. Regulators have to work directly with the industry because that's where the main knowledge and innovation is taking place. But we have to allow for some regulatory sandbox to do that experimentation, to have a better understanding of the intended and intended consequences, whether it's a period of time, capping trading, or demanding specific aspects that could be measured at a specific period of time to make that happen. So that would be my recommendation on that.
Great, thank you. Out of time, actually.
Oui, Monsieur Gaillard, vous avez en effet le temps est.
Yes, your time has expired, but I see that Ms. Bouchard has her hand raised, and I'll leave you a little bit of time to briefly answer.
Par exemple, vous êtes en sourdine.
You are on mute, though.
Excusez-moi.
I apologize. I think it would be a good time to intervene to protect consumers. We've been experimenting for several years now. And all you have to do is look at the end of FTX, and I think that's the blatant example of the fact that we need to intervene now. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Desiel.
Thank you, Mr. Delille. If it's very brief, please go ahead, but very briefly.
Vous êtes également en sourdine.
And you are also on mute. Thank you. I would like to echo that comment. I think regulation is necessary to protect citizens because without regulation, we've concluded that citizens have no alternate options, or there is no safe place for them to go, at least to ensure that the market authorities at least support people. Without such resources, however, people are left in the lion's pit. They are relegated to their own devices. And I know somebody in my family who was who got into trouble because of a person who was not to be trusted. And you have persons who act as intermediaries, and they can be dangerous unless they are in fact supported. Thank you very much, Mr. Demille. 6 minutes. Let me try to use 5 minutes and 30 seconds because these are our witnesses from Quebec. Thank you very much for being here. First of all, Mr. Gauthier, thank you very much for your generous contribution and your leadership to encourage Quebec companies to take on this digital transformation. You spoke about the White Book. We'd like to have more time to understand this. Would you agree to table that White Book as part of your testimony? Yes, I'd be very pleased to do that. Ms. Bouchard, your background is very impressive, and again, we're very pleased to be able to count on your knowledge in Quebec. You're one of the pioneer researchers who debunked how blockchain is applied in notary's practice. It is a form of intelligent contract. Could you speak to that application? Because I think that other professionals like engineers or accountants might be able to revolutionize their practices as a result. Thank you very much for your comments. What we saw over the course of time, once blockchain had emerged, and of course, as we know, it is a means of certifying and accrediting data. So this was confusing for the notary, who was a public officer, but he's not a certifier. He's the notary public in Anglo-Saxon countries. So what we saw that in the civic tradition in Quebec, and notaries are not the first to do this, we have French notaries as well as in Italy. They also have a similar status. So we've put in place an intelligent contract mechanism, among others, because we know that the blockchain technology has three main benefits. That is the automation of transactions, certification of data. I'd say that it is the perfect technology for the registers, and it's also a means for us to mobilize coins that can be traded worldwide. So we're currently developing a prototype for a notary blockchain in 3 phases, and one of the phases will be used to automate notary crisis with the COVID crisis. Notaries now put together digital deeds, and as a result, we will be integrating these intelligent contracts as a result into these ledgers. This will enable us to provide greater protection for Quebec citizens. In a further phase, these notaries will then use certain types of tokens, for example, to dematerialize properties or intellectual properties. So in brief, that is what we will be working on in the coming months. So thank you. In a university article, the blockchain technology can meet with the issues of managing increasingly complicated supply chains, but there are also issues. For example, each portion of a supply chain is located in a different part of the world. It'll be difficult to call on the correct authorities to intervene. Specifically, for example, we're thinking about intelligent ports where there's logistics of transportation. You have documents that has to be tied to each loading and to the border crossing. So what can you put in place to manage this? Is the current blockchain technology being used to manage some supply chains? And is it sufficient? For example, if that is the case, how can we then use it to manage problems? Well, I could give you the beginning of an answer. Blockchain technology has some benefits, specifically when it comes to assuring integrity of data. As I mentioned, for example, in the instance of supply chains, this technology will guarantee data protection. It allows for normalizing processes. It will also reduce waste of resources and abuse. However, of course, it isn't going to solve all issues, given the example that you've just cited. In the case where, for example, we have a public blockchain, because, of course, you have to differentiate between the private and public blockchains. So in the case of a private one, the issue would be different. But if we are dealing with a public blockchain, and you've pointed exactly on the important issue here, there are risks, and this is an example where it would be necessary to intervene to safeguard our data. and to ensure that this data doesn't end up on the other side of the Atlantic or somewhere else. So that is an important point. But in the example you've quoted, there are some major benefits in using this technology. Nevertheless, this would have to be framed. This technology cannot simply be rolled out in a universe without any kind of regulation. This is an example of a possible limit. Thank you very much, Mr. Didier. You've written a lot on your website on the place of open and free digital technology in promoting French Quebec culture. So we take it that you're foreseeing information to recognize the work of our creators and artists. Could you explain the role that blockchain could play here? Thank you very much for that question. The first applications that we're seeing up here were aimed at protecting the consumption of cultural content. And again, it's all about digital rights management. That is, you cannot execute content or reading or a file without the specifically granted permission given by a specific blockchain. So that is one of the means that we can consider. However, where I see a much more relevant and useful use case, and I do believe Ms. Woods also referred to this at the very beginning, is in everything that is called revenue sharing, and that is nano administration of revenues. In the cultural industry, there are many different types of resources, and they provide less and less money. However, they do involve administrative work, so that sometimes it's more costly to manage revenues, and that actually exceeds the amount of the revenues earned. So it might be possible to put in place an Excel file that would receive the revenues and would send a fair portion to everybody, and this would be executed without any human intervention, smoothly in a transparent fashion and ongoing, and it becomes so sexy that no doubt that is what we'll be seeing in the future. It's just a matter of time. And in closing, I'd add this. It's also a matter of the user's experience. No doubt this is the only field that is a hindrance to blockchain adoption right now, because for users, you are in charge of their own key. That is the own key to your safe. This should be mentioned. It's a matter of time before all users in our society be in a position where they're able to manage this. And as the gentleman from MasterCard said earlier, it's very important to invest in platforms that will take care of persons' keys if that is necessary. But what is certain is that a lot is about education. We need to make people aware, and this will lead us to the adoption of this technology more quickly. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Brassy Massé for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses and testimony. And I'll turn this over maybe to start, Madame Bouchard, and then to everyone else who wants to talk about this, because you brought up about, I guess, the not-for-profits as well too, but concerned about fraud, and how do we move forward on a solid policy and also deal with fraud that is, part of every industry and have lots of significant problems. So public confidence has been shaken, I think, most recently. So how do we deal with that, and how do we build in a kind of a path forward to get over that, to build confidence and accountability?
Je vous remercie pour votre.
Thank you for your question. That is a major question. When you consider fraud, there are 2 points. First of all, there's technology as such. And blockchain technology at this point is one of the safest technologies. It performs the best on the market because of its characteristics. These were mentioned. We heard the witnesses speak to this. Since the beginning, there is the notion of cryptography, the notion of the integrity of the information, traceability, transparency. As a result, these really are the key features of blockchain. Bitcoin, for example, has never been produced as a counterfeit since 2008, since it was created. And let me move on to another point. It's the use of this technology by individuals, which unfortunately, too often, in most cases, will lead to fraud. So your question is very tough. At the same time, it's very simple, and yet it is difficult to answer this. Because, of course, we have to regulate the use of this technology by technologies. My colleague earlier said that it's important to invest in platforms, and I agree with him. But at the same time, we need to frame these platforms because there are human beings behind this. As you know, blockchain technology, as well as the disappearance, we'll see the disappearance of some intermediaries. But at the same time, we're seeing the emergence of new intermediaries, of new players, because we need to say this, blockchain plays out like all technologies in a world, in a universe, where, of course, we have persons who will use it. And unfortunately, for all of the ferocious players who contributed to developing this technology, requires protection for consumers. So in brief, I'd say that we need to differentiate between the strengths and characteristics of the technology from the way that the technology is used by individuals who will commit fraud and will use it wrongly. So I think we need to work on these individuals. Thank you.
So I have three others that are, and I probably have about 3 minutes left. So I could ask, start with Mr. Mills and go across the board here. And if you could take a minute, I'd like to hear from everybody on this. It's an issue that I have a lot of interest in. So please, Mr. Mills, and then if everybody could take 1 minute, I think, Mr. Chair, that should be able to hopefully get all the testimony in.
Thanks. Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think one of the important things that we should be looking at in terms of making Canada more safe from fraud in crypto markets, I'm going to take a progressive sort of open view here and just look at, let's say not everything that's happening in blockchain tokens and digital assets or whatever is fraudulent pump and dumps and stuff like that. I'm not saying that right now. I'm saying, let's say there's some digital commodities that maybe it's not just Bitcoin, maybe there's other things as well that meet the guidelines that would make it safe for people to want to invest in long term or save in like Bitcoin. Personally, I just think it's Bitcoin. But one thing for sure, we do not have friendly banking regulations here for Bitcoin companies. And I think we need to improve that, especially maybe working with companies that are creating this SPDI framework in Wyoming to be able to allow companies like ShakePay, which has 1 million Canadian customers that have Bitcoin, to have a bank charter. So, Bitcoin banks, Canadians would be able to put their Bitcoin in Bitcoin banks rather than resorting to maybe going off and speculating at these companies that are like not even holding Bitcoin and they're just pretending to sell you Bitcoin overseas.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Deziel. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. Deziel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question. Je répondrai à cette question-là par...
I would respond by reiterating the importance of regulating, not only to regulate people and to explain to them what to do, what not to do, but specifically to put in place institutions that help those who create initiatives and who launch opportunities in this field. As an example, one of the reasons why I wanted to go to a cryptocurrency purchasing platform is because they had FinTrack there. And that is a market authority that is reassuring for the consumer. It's reassuring for us to see that there is regulation on these platforms. This doesn't mean, however, that they can't play with the money. And I think human behavior is not without fault. And I think that the authorities and institutions, as well as government, must put in place systems that reassure and that approve startups, perhaps even by encouraging securities authorities, for example, sandboxes, not sandbanks, but to make sure that these entities and the startups be well channeled and well supported from the outset, and I think that would be very reassuring for our citizens.
Waters, and then thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. As Madame Bouchard said, crypto has seen the appearance of new intermediaries, and I think the two are particularly important to achieving trust in the ecosystem, that of exchanges or virtual asset service providers, and that of stablecoin issuers. In the case of exchanges, it's particularly important to ensure that appropriate supervisory regimes exist around the segregation of customer assets. One of the reasons that the failure of FTX has been so challenging has been the commingling of FTX assets and customer assets in inappropriate ways. With respect to stablecoin issuers, it's critical that the stabilization mechanism underlying that stablecoin be effectively monitored to ensure that the stablecoin is appropriately collateralized, either being wholly collateralized by bank deposits in the case of an e-money type stablecoin, or being issued by a bank institution in the case of a tokenized deposit style stablecoin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Mr. Williams for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So I've been very consistent when I asked my panelists some questions. I'm trying to get a scope if anyone has any hard data on the size, worth, and how many jobs blockchain is worth to Canada right now. So do any witnesses have that data?
Maybe I can add, perhaps I can add a little. So the study that we did back in 2020 indicated that there are approximately 16,000, the workforce in Canada with a CAGR at the time. In fact, even 2017, we estimated that's growing by 33% year over year. I think, we need definitely a more in-depth analysis of this market. But as I highlighted in my earlier briefing, is that the market's growing quite considerably across the globe, with many countries taking a first mover advantage in that space, with a potential for us to not only develop the talent but lose that talent to south of the border, but also many other countries in Europe and potentially in Asia.
Thank you. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I only have so much time. Does anyone have anyone else to add? And if not, the witnesses can also submit data.
Moi, j'aimerais répondre par rapport à ça que la demande a...
I'd like to give an answer. This was done to obtain hard data, but the problem in our industry is some analyses are quite qualitative rather than quantitative. For instance, I can guarantee that all of the miners left in Quebec due to some moratoriums that were dissuasive, for instance. And I can reassure you that as an entrepreneur, it's difficult for me to find developers, and because they will work for other enterprises outside of Canada, and either they're in Toronto or they leave. So it's difficult to cite clear data. But what I would encourage you what to do in regulation is to perhaps consider an institution that can assess this impact. Thank you.
So much. Ms. Woods, what are the potential uses of blockchain by government?
That's a huge question, and I'm sure you know that, which is probably why you asked. Passports, great example, passports, driver's licenses, health cards, anything that relates to needing to show identity is the digital identity use case. And it underpins every time you need to take out something to do something. Digital identity is huge. We talked briefly in my opening, I spoke about crime and what's happening with crime, whether it be financing of crime or crimes happening through technology. I really can't enforce enough to this group that it's imperative law enforcement is funded properly and equipped to handle crimes of all nature because they're increasingly having a blockchain bent to them, although, for clarity, less than 1% of blockchains actually support criminals and criminal activity, so it's a minor piece of it. When we look at research and data, so cancer research, for example, making sure that the data that's collected from all of the testing that's happening in all of the medical research is verified, confirmed, time-stamped, etc., very important. When we talk about creators' rights, back in 2008, I imagined a world where licensing was spontaneous for copyrights of all kinds and any kind of content. Certainly, I was ahead of my time. Unfortunately, now I get to, be happy and see people innovating in the space. But those royalties are worth billions. It's not a small industry, the entertainment industry. It's huge, and so it goes.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I'm ceding 1 minute of my time to Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for the witnesses in advance for this, but I'd like to move the motion that I gave notice of earlier today, and I believe the clerks circulated, that the chair report the following to the House, that the committee recommends that the Government of Canada freeze CPP and EI increases for small and medium-sized enterprises to help offset the financial burdens caused by labor shortages and high inflation. And briefly speaking to it, EI in particular, which has been consolidated into general revenues, is running a massive surplus, much higher than is needed to support the program, and at a time where small businesses and workers are suffering from the cost of high inflation, putting on a higher payroll cost, reducing paychecks in the next fiscal year, calendar year, will only harm an already fragile economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perkins, for bringing this motion to the floor. Are there any comments? And I'll just, colleagues, give my 2 cents as chair, not on the substance of the motion, but just on the interest, given that we have so many fascinating witnesses, that we proceed with this matter as quickly as possible. So, Mr. Fillmore.
Thanks, Chair. It's my strong feeling that there's a committee report on SMEs going to the House shortly. That's really the place for recommendations. I'll add a short personal editorial. It doesn't seem the right time at all to be giving employers a pass on their contribution to workers' EI and CPP benefits in a moment of inflation when people are going to be needing those benefits intact, not diluted. So I regret to say that we'll be unable to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. I see Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thought long and hard about this motion and appreciate the intent of it, but I can't support it for a couple of reasons that I think are important to put on the record because I think the intent is genuine. First of all, I would prefer a system that the United States has done over the last several decades. It's called the Earned Income Tax Credit, where that actually returns the contributions to workers to them and their families directly, and then also businesses get a repertoire of tax breaks, being small and medium-sized and smaller independently owned businesses that are geared towards various government services, policies, and supports. This is actually a 50-year-old legislation that was actually originally introduced in the United States by Richard Nixon, of all people. And the workers directly get that money back. I'm also concerned about employees still pay, and obviously Canada Pension affects their long-term earnings for families. I also have a little concerns of a small business. I'm much more empathetic for something like this versus medium size, which I know that there's a big difference between what they're going through right now. Additionally, this is also with the labor shortage, an issue related to wage suppression that could take place on workers with regards to their capital in the free market economy. And then lastly, it would affect the surplus, which as New Democrats, we have advocated for changing the EI system quite extensively for decades. And I know it's under review now, but even just most recently in my riding, we had severance taken away from workers because of the broken system, whereas we think that those people that have already paid into those types of services should be expanded, especially when you have marginalized workers that can't actually get employment insurance, including women who overrepresent those that actually cannot get EI right now. So I would rather expand the EI that people have already paid into to those workers versus that of reducing those opportunities later on.
Merci, Monsieur Massé. Monsieur Lemire.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Chair. Of course, we support the idea of helping our SMEs, specifically in this context of a labor shortage and the high inflation we're seeing.
I see that there are no further members who want to intervene on this subject, and Mr. Perkins, my astute observation tells me that this motion will not pass. Do you want a recorded vote or recorded vote? Okay, Mr. Clerk.
In favor.
En faveur. En faveur.
Mr. Viz.
In favor.
Mr. Fillmore.
In opposition.
Mr. Gahir.
Against.
Mr. Long.
Against.
Mr. Dong.
No.
Mr. Erskine Smith.
No.
Monsieur Lemire.
I vote no.
No.
And Mr. Massey.
Opposed.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your cooperation in dealing with this matter as swiftly as possible. Donc, c'était tout le temps que vous aviez, Monsieur Williams.
Mr. Williams, Mr. Perkins, that was all the time you had. I'll turn it over to Mr. Dong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses for coming today, and we have quite a few of you. And just apologize for that little interruption, but that's normal. I want to assure you that this committee is nonpartisan, right? Or at least less partisan than what's going on in the House. Speaking of the House, there was a private member's bill that spoke to cryptocurrency. But what we have in front of us, this is the third meeting, is broader than that. And we've heard from multiple stakeholders from different aspects and given us very valuable opinions on this technology. And so, first of all, would you agree that this is a broader study, a more comprehensive study than what was presented in the House?
This is a broader study than what was presented in the House.
And you talked about in your statement and answering the questions, you talked about the government has provided support in digital technology. This current government, is that correct?
For digital technology, yes.
So in comparison, say, to the last government, because I saw in your resume that you've been in this industry for 15 years, would you say the current government has made more investment compared to the last government in science and technology?
I would need the numbers to answer truthfully. I would need the numbers in front of me.
Could you look at the numbers? I just want to give the committee a good, because your testimony is very important.
Thank you.
And if you can look into the numbers and get back to us.
Yes, I can.
Mr. Poilievre said, and I'm sure you heard this during question period, being brought up quite a few times. Give the advice to Canadians during the pandemic that they should invest in cryptocurrency to save or to guard them against domestic inflation. Yes or no? Do you think it's a good advice to give the general public that advice?
I don't give investment advice to anybody.
There you go. And also, I collect from your testimony, you said you believe that there is a lack of guidance from the government or government sectors or government agencies, and also educational program for the general public on digital financing. And it would be very irresponsible to, given that if this is the context, to give the general public that, hey, you should invest in cryptocurrency to safeguard your savings.
I'm an incredible promoter of digital skills, digital literacy, cyber literacy, and blockchain education. I've been supporting the development of programs for digital skills, including the Digital Skills Strategy for Canada, since its inception. So I believe there's a lot of literacy generally that Canadians would benefit from, including financial literacy at the most basic level. So I'm a strong supporter of education.
And on that, what can government do to give it a boost so more people are aware of what cryptocurrencies are, the risk associated with it, what blockchain technology is, and how much it can change our lives in the future?
Thank you for the question. That's a fantastic question. It's a critical question because it's as much a question for children as it is for teachers, as it is for adults, as it is for every Canadian. The more we can understand the environment we exist in, the better we're able to make informed decisions. What this government can do is fund programs for digital literacy that include blockchain education, crypto education, NFT education, metaverse education, and so on. I think it's fundamental. The other thing that this government can do is inform and support agencies that are working to protect the public interest and equally equip them with resources to gain this education.
That's very helpful. You also mentioned there's outdated legislation that we need to look into. Can you be more specific on that?
I'd like to give you one example, and I would encourage this committee to reach out to Canadian law enforcement and include them in this discussion. I think it's really important that you hear from them. I was part of a Chatham House rules discussion most recently in Ottawa about maybe a month and a half ago. And I heard from law enforcement officials who had to take evidence back and forth from court several times to be empowered to make a seizure against a criminal who they clearly knew and had evidence to support was a criminal because the criminal code provisions were out of date. So the criminal code provisions, as I understand it from their hearsay, is not adequate to address digital asset crime and crypto crime.
That's
so
very
they do
helpful.
need some support. This is part of my recommendation for a holistic approach, looking at each piece, you know, as we go of the system that would be required for strengthening to support Canadians.
You also talk about trade, and I don't know how much time I have left, but
You're already over, but
oh,
yeah. We'll get back to you, Mr. Dong.
Okay, we'll talk about trade after.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Monsieur Lemire.
Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Gauthier. Regarding education, well, let's think, are we giving our citizens and our everybody here, are we giving them with enough information to understand these major technologies like blockchain? As a society, will we be able to adapt to this need? Well, this is a very important question for me because we were behind the adoption of a digital strategy in Quebec in 2014. And from the very outset, we proposed to the government to launch to think through this, to think about literacy to citizens across the board. It is an issue that affects all of society. It's a very important question for all of society. But unfortunately, for all kinds of reasons, the government decided not to move ahead with this. But I think it's never too late to do this well. And against this backdrop, you're absolutely correct. There are some very strong measures that need to be taken to improve people's literacy and to enable them to better understand so that they're able to better manage their digital identities. And I mentioned that in introduction earlier. In my mind, blockchain is a historic opportunity for us to change the paradigm, not only to safeguard our digital identity, but as to how we manage technologies in the state, because we talked about the ledger as we had. This is a secure technology that would eventually make it possible to work differently from what we're doing today. Because as you know, and I'm not saying that, Einstein said this, you can't solve a problem by gathering people around the table. They've created this problem. And all we've done now is stack one problem on top of another. We have this giant building and it's too fragile. We have to change the way that we do things and that we use how we use technologies at government. So who currently is benefiting from the absence of a legislative or legal framework with respect to these digital technologies? Well, Guillaume could speak better to this, but in my mind, this absence of regulation is so that it benefits persons who have bad intentions, and they undermine the confidence that we should have in blockchain. And in my mind, that's terrible because we need to tell them from the beginning that they can count on a legal framework that will enable us to counter this. No doubt Guillaume can give an answer. Yes, I'd like to add this. Thank you very much. I'd like to add that it's not simply a matter of regulation, because let's not forget one point. In distributed technologies, we can't always over-regulate because it's like letting something simply run off into nature. And we've tried it in Quebec, and it hasn't worked. No doubt it won't work. Even quantum computing won't achieve this, according to some sources. But what I would say is this. We couldn't if you can't regulate, you should really work on encouraging best practices surrounding regulation. For instance, No doubt you will not be able to stop Bitcoin. However, you could incite people to understand this, to foster digital literacy, to understand crypto in our environment. You could encourage the use of secure technologies such as blockchain. For example, you've just voted on a motion. You could have done this using blockchain technology without any issues and without there being any possibility of fraud. So you could use this not only to prevent some bad guys from profiting as bogus intermediaries, but you could also encourage good practice and the proper knowledge. Again, I know I cannot stress this enough, this particular aspect. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, perhaps I'll turn over to Mr. Anani for an answer.
Je voulais juste ajouter.
I'd just like to say a few words on what we've just addressed. In fact, there are a number of different means by which we can boost education. We need to train people for the future, but then, secondly, we need to work with post-secondary education institutions because it's very important to develop this to meet with the needs of the industry. But there's a key point, thirdly, that is we need to work directly with industry because much of the sector is represented by SMEs and by micro enterprises as well. They don't have the resources to obtain training and to become familiar with this technology to reduce their administrative burden, whether they work in manufacturing or perhaps in a supply chain or even in the healthcare sector. So it's very important to do this. And the fourth point is that, of course, we need to work with citizens in order to provide them with training so that they can have enough confidence to really do transactions, to work in the field, but to also consume these products. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Massé, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to Mr. Anani. I think I'm hoping perhaps you can answer this, and if anybody else wants to chime in as well too. If we're looking at creating some standards, norms, and I know as the world grapples with trying to have some type of, I guess, common links together, would we be better off to try to engage the United States and Mexico under agreement like USMCA or CUMSA, whatever, versus that of like, right through our, major trading partners as a first step forward? Or are we better to work through an entire kind of more universal approach, a multilateral approach with other nations? And I see Mr. McWaters wants in as well too, which is great. So I'll go to Mr. Anani and then Mr. McWaters and whoever else wants to add. We got about 2 minutes to go.
Well, I mean, it is clear it's best to work with our trade partners actually, and that not only the United States and Mexico, but let's not forget the CETA with Europe as well. I mean, specifically, they developed this MICA regulation, and I think we can leverage a lot of these aspects, maybe go beyond it, and creating the regulatory sandboxes that are necessary, because I believe in an environment, and having worked in the regulatory domain at the CRTC, there are instances where innovation requires experimentation, and that we have to think larger than that. But I don't think we have to also look at what's happening around the world. Singapore is developing a lot of these capabilities, as much as smaller countries like Malta, Estonia, and others. But it's a good start to start with our trading partners.
Quickly over to Mr. McWaters and Mr. Mills. I think I got about 1.5 minutes, so I'll turn it over to the chair as well. Please.
I would concur that there's value to interacting with our trading partners, but like Mr. Nani, I would suggest that looking at the MiCA comprehensive crypto asset regulation in Europe would be valuable, as well as a number of the international regulatory standard setters that exist in this space. There is extensive work underway by the Financial Stability Board and the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure of the Bank for International Settlement on setting appropriate standards in this space, as well as specifically within the context of KYC and AML, the Financial Action Task Force, all of whom are helping to establish standards that can then be interpreted within national regulatory jurisdictions in ways that promote regulatory harmonization and heightened levels of compliance. And so I would suggest that Canada should be as actively involved as possible with those ongoing undertakings, which are in flight at the moment.
Mr. Chair, that was a great question, and I would also just frame this as we should be progressive in looking at regulations. The SEC has a really great framework around what is a security, what is not a security, and we should definitely be working with United States regulators to apply that here. But also, I think we also have to kind of look at what is the demand for using things like stable coins in Canada, and with more and more people needing to send remittances across border with Bitcoin and with stable coins, why don't we have more progressive banking regulations here in Canada to allow companies like challenger banks to come up into Canada, like Cash App and things like that? So I think we shouldn't just be trying to clamp down more on things. We should be trying to follow the lead there, as well as open banking a little bit more and give consumers more of a choice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mills, and that was all your time, Mr. Massé. Avant qu'on passe à Monsieur Généraux.
Before we turn it over to Mr. Généraux, I would need unanimous consent to continue for at least 20 more minutes. Is that amenable to you? Very well. So we have consent. Mr. Généraux, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Mrs. Wood, we've just seen a crisis in the spring regarding Canadian passports, and you said to Mr. Dung that the government could have used blockchain. Could we have, both for passports as for driving license in the provinces especially, could we have done this more quickly? Could we do this in a secure fashion? I believe that it is already very secure in Canada. I think that it is quite secure, but could we even enhance the security of passport administration using blockchain?
Yes, is the short answer. Canada undertook a trial regarding passports. Actually, there was an innovation effort done some years ago, I believe, with the Netherlands. So it is possible. I mean, in retrospect, hindsight is 20/20, but it's not too late. We're going to have to do this. The world is moving in this direction. It's a very natural evolution from biometric passporting that we're going to secure these credentials.
Est-ce que les chaînes de blocs sont véritablement
Are blockchains really incorruptible? Because you mentioned that earlier when it came to identity. I had put the question to a previous witness in another meeting. That's 8 billion that we could have in an entire system where everybody has an identity. We have all of the data for us, as well as for the environment. We know how much we consume, how much we buy in terms of groceries, etc. At the end of the day, individually would be there, but everybody would be in the same system. Is that something that we could see happen one day?
When I speak to the context of human trafficking, there's innovation happening. I'll let my friends participate because I can see hands up as well. I'm certain on the question of incorruptibility, there's comments to add. But when we speak of something like human trafficking, one of the solutions that I'm working with, it's global innovators, and they're thinking through border officials, so customs and border officials that have to read passports. Oftentimes these documents are falsified, so people are given fake identities so that they can be pulled across the border and continue to be trafficked. In this case, this is another government set of representatives working with other government representatives around the world to try and design a system so that it can be stopped. I think this is a fantastic use case. It's a very important use case. When we talk about digital identity, it needs to be incorruptible, but cyber crime will continue. Cybersecurity threats will continue, and so money and expectation of constant innovation should be there.
Monsieur Désir, vous voulez rajouter?
Do you have something you'd like to add, Mr. Desir? Yes, I had a question. If you had, let's say, 12 eggs that you'd like to make secure, are you going to put them in the same basket? Or is it better to distribute them in various places? So distributed technologies are, by design, a better answer to securing data because all data is not in the same place. That's the first point. Secondly, many conversations have taken place regarding the threat that the quantum computers would pose to blockchain technologies. And until we see the contrary, at least I'm speaking for Bitcoin, a great deal of people believe that a lot of the problems of proof of work would have to be adjusted depending on those enterprises doing the mining. And as a result, we'd be able to maintain this data and to resist a quantum attack. And I'd say that this is much safer than putting all of your eggs in the same basket in some kind of database. And I'd like to apologize for witnesses who raise their hands, but I'd like to have a question for Ms. Liberton, because you spoke about government and regulation. What would you expect to see with respect to these technologies in terms of government support or assistance to assure innovation in Canada? Because from our witnesses who spoke previously, I understand that there's been an exodus of people with respect to this field.
Yeah, I think the lack of clarity, the lack of support from a funding perspective has ultimately driven a lot of our talent. Canada was very early in this ecosystem. A ton of talent was born in Canada and is subsequently now taken their businesses, taken their innovation, taken their property and established themselves elsewhere in the world. We've touched on the UAE a number of times throughout the past couple of hours. I've had the privilege of spending quite a bit of time over there, and they've done an incredible job of attracting and supporting talent and startups in this space. They're working collaboratively between the public sector, the private sector, with the support of the sovereigns, and they're doing an incredible job of really taking a leadership position in building out those ecosystems and owning global talent, many of whom are Canadian.
Monsieur le Président, j'ai encore du temps?
Do I have any time left? No, unfortunately not, Mr. Généraux. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be sharing my time with our esteemed Chair. It occurs to me, we've heard a lot of testimony that blockchain is very effective for secure transactions or digital identity. You can spend time and you can mine for coins and make some money. I would like to turn the conversation more to, it's more of a philosophical answer I'm looking for, I think. And Monsieur Gauthier, you used the term collective intelligence, and that was very interesting to me. I wonder what your best hopes for blockchain is to uplift us as a culture, as a society. What is the promise of blockchain that we're not seeing when we focus too much on making money off of it?
Merci beaucoup pour votre question.
Thank you very much for your question. I believe, as I said earlier, that blockchain is a historic opportunity to confer power to citizens and to give them back the ability to manage their own information, their own data. The only one in charge of managing personal data should be the individual, and that is something that I fundamentally believe in. With blockchain, as was mentioned earlier, we're able to give back the power to citizens to manage information about them and that they can authorize. But again, there's disclosure of information that will have to be authorized. So I believe that this ability that enables us to give that ability back to the citizens to manage their information as well, it makes it more democratic. What I'm the most interested in is when you see the loss of confidence that we have, that we're experiencing in our democratic systems, it is necessary to take concrete measures to give citizens an ability to take part in the public sector decisions, that people become directly involved and that they take advantage of this information to make decisions based on facts. And that's called budgetization based on results. That is, we're able to use the information of citizens to support the directions of our programs based on an outcome and not based on the habits that we had, because at the end of the day, we're simply putting money where we think it should go. Truly, it is a major paradigm shift in how we manage, and that is what digital governance is it is open with a digital tool that will enable people to take part much more actively in a decision-making process. Mr. Gauthier. Thank you very much, Mr. Fulmore and Mr. Mills. I'll turn it over to you.
The chance to answer. I was listening recently, and I'm not sure I understand it all because I'm not a technology geek, but I was listening to Gary Gensler's MIT class on Bitcoin and blockchain from 2018. And what struck me is, and Gary Gensler, for those who don't know, is the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US. And basically what struck me is that he had there are two things that really that the class focused on, both the technological innovation of Satoshi Nakamoto with blockchain and how it solved also, for one thing, the double spending problem, but also the monetary innovation. And one thing I noticed from Gensler was he said, Bitcoin has a potential to be a catalyst for change in finance and money. And I'd like to hear you, Mr. Mills, on, to you, what's the value proposition of Bitcoin?
I appreciate that question, Mr. Chair. That's something, as I said in my opening statement, that is really important to me. It's the reason why I'm still in Bitcoin 11 years later, and why I'm spending my money and putting my money where my mouth is to help the billions of people around the world that live under some sort of financial oppression. This is a real problem that we don't really pay too much attention to here in the West because, you know, we have a money system that works. We have banks that work pretty well. So it's not something that we think of as a day-to-day need, that we need Bitcoin as a payment method. But for people that I'm talking to and working with in Nigeria and El Salvador and places around the world, I mean, there's 200 million people in Nigeria that are experiencing hyperinflation right now, and they're turning to Bitcoin as a tool to kind of like a shield to pick up. And earlier there was just something that was mentioned about like Bitcoin not being used as a tool for protecting against inflation. That's you know, another thing that we should try not to be partisan about, where we look at something someone says and then kind of ascribe those values, because Bitcoin is a tool for good for the world and for the billions of people that live under financial oppression. The people in Nigeria, even though Bitcoin maybe went down 70% from when some of them bought it, they're currently limited to $45 a day to be able to withdraw from Naira in their accounts. So they have no choice but to turn to something like Bitcoin. So as well as companies like mining companies that do off-grid mining for there's 300 million people in Africa that don't have access to secure power. So Bitcoin actually positively impacts the grid, and in a way, it's actually going to accelerate the world's adoption of clean energy. So I think that Bitcoin is a tool for freedom, and that's one of the things that makes me so excited about Bitcoin. And, you know, I would love to see more people in poverty in Canada be lifted up from reframing themselves from short-term thinking to long-term thinking and saving, because trading cryptocurrencies and minting NFTs and trading them, well, that might be fine if you're a stock trader or something like that. But the real innovation here is being able to save in a disinflationary money that is free from the corruptible influences of a CEO or any world government that can change the monetary policy on you, like many people, billions of people are experiencing all over the world.
Yeah, I think Lebanon is also a quite telling example of that, how people were prevented from withdrawing from the traditional legacy banking sector. And that allows me to pivot to Madame Leverton. I'll ask this in French. Vous avez mentionné,
You mentioned that you mine Bitcoin. So what is the environmental impact? Because that is something that's often mentioned. I'd like to invite our colleagues, our guests to speak to this. So what is the environmental impact from crypto mining, specifically Bitcoin?
Yeah, so mining in the context that you're asking the question is really proof of work mining. So proof of work is the type of mining used for Bitcoin. Ethereum used to use that same technology, but they've recently moved to proof of stake. Brad did a very good job of touching on it. We actually, in the mining industry, see it as a potential for significant good in addressing the environmental crisis and helping to fund a faster move to cleaner energy, cleaner technologies. We're seeing incredible innovation happening in people converting what would otherwise be flare gas or waste gas into Bitcoin mining at flare sites, which keeps that carbon from being emitted into the atmosphere. We're also seeing incredible innovation happening using landfill waste as a source of energy to then be converted into Bitcoin and reducing the landfill emissions. Brad talked about the work being done in developing nations, where if a mine can be set up and help support the creation of new clean energy, which otherwise wasn't able to be created in part because of the transmission and distribution problems, whereas a Bitcoin mine can really be set up in very remote areas and act as a way to digitize energy. I mean, at the end of the day, what Bitcoin really is digitized energy, which can then be transferred in a seamless and decentralized manner.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Desiel, Madame Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Desiel. Madame Bouchard. Well, I'd like to add something to this environmental argument. It really depends on your energy sources. In Canada, we're fortunate to be able to count on clean energy sources compared to the situation elsewhere in North America. So essentially in the calculation, you have to account for the energy source before we look at the energy consumption portion. And at the end of the day, we can then calculate the environmental impact. But there are other cryptos that are not inflationist, and it's also a solid foundation for lowering growth. If we're speaking about environmental impact, we have to wonder whether or not this economy we're in, which is based on constant growth and which pushes people to continue to consume, is that the right foundation, perhaps? And I'd say that fiat is no longer backed on gold and hasn't been since 1971, and now it is tied to sovereignty of the nation. So its position, its military alliances, its geopolitical alliances, and as a result, perhaps might even go as far as nuclear weapons, as we've seen in arguments, are there. So all of this has to be put in perspective when we're asking these questions. That is whether or not mining Bitcoin is a means of furthering pollution. I'll be brief because I was very generous towards myself. I exceeded the time allotted to me. Allow me to add 2 points. First of all, proof of work and blockchain is an emerging system. A great deal of research is being done and things will change. And we often forget that blockchain is very interesting and many studies have shown this. It's about decentralization of energy systems. And I invite you to look at the studies published on blockchain as an opportunity for consumers of energy in the New York suburbs, where there's a prototype of transatlantic drive, which showcases all of the benefits of blockchain with respect to decentralized energy systems of investments, carbon markets, etc. So in brief, I'd like to thank you. Well, from what I understand, when you mine Bitcoin, if we look at Hydro-Quebec, we're also going to produce to meet maximum demand. There's always going to be a loss of energy. And I think this technology might be interesting to monetize this energy and perhaps eventually be able to send it throughout the world through trading. Ms. Leverton, and to conclude.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I talked about that in my opening remarks in the example at our site at the City of Medicine Hat, where that our ability to consume that energy when it's not required by the local community means it's a completely efficient system.
Okay, good.
I'm Mr. Viss,
Thanks,
please.
Brad. The other thing I wanted to point out, Hut 8 is one of the founding members of the Global Bitcoin Mining Council, which publishes research on a quarterly basis that specifically addresses the energy sources of Bitcoin mining around the world. And what we've been able to demonstrate is quarter over quarter an increased use of renewable energy sources. And we're actually one of the most renewable intensive industries on the planet, with over 58% of the Bitcoin mining industry using renewable sources. I think one of the challenges we face as an industry is that it is so transparent. Our energy use is well understood and well known, and therefore it gets a lot more attention. Whereas if you look at other industries, the fiat or gold mining, or even the gaming industry, for example, you really can't quantify the amount of energy they use the way you can with Bitcoin. So we think of proof of work mining as a feature, that this transparency, this decentralization, these are all features of the system, and the ability to use it for greater good, not just in the output of Bitcoin itself, but in the ability to monetize energy and to build stable renewable grids is it's truly incredible technology.
Thank you. And Mr.
And
Mills, Mr.
Sorry.
Mills, the final word briefly, because we have to go vote.
Sure, Mr. Chair, just wanted to put in one final point of consideration for everybody, that Bitcoin founders, entrepreneurs that are interested in these other use cases like decentralized identity and peer-to-peer technology like the decentralized web, that is being built out on stacks, on layers on top of Bitcoin, and even without blockchain at all.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. I'm sorry, we're gonna, and I know you want to go to the Lightning Network, I assume, and that's also very fascinating. It's a very interesting technology for those curious enough to take an interest beyond the caricature of Bitcoin bros and the likes. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your knowledge with us. And sur ce, je dois ajourner la rencontre. Donc, la rencontre est ajournée. Merci.
The meeting stands adjourned. Our analysts, our colleagues, our interpreters, our clerk, thank you very much. The meeting stands adjourned.